Thank you for downloading this episode of our podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast for Solomon Staircase Masonic Lodge number 357, where we talk about all things related with Freemasonry, including Hermetic teachings, philosophy, reason, spirituality, and much more. We're located in Buena Park, Southern California. Tune in as we continue to update our podcast with informative talks and articles for Masons worldwide and those who would like to inquire within.
Hello and welcome back. In this episode, we are going to be focusing on the October 2016 Southern California Research Lodge Fraternal Review. This is volume 57, number 9. And the focus of this issue was the two pillars, or is the two pillars. So starting off with the editor's word. In this issue of Fraternal Review, we continue our focus on symbols seen in many Masonic lodge rooms around the world. The two pillars are imbued with great richness and variety of meanings. In his short talk bulletin, Brother Carl Claudy lists several viewpoints on the pillars and presents interpretations that he particularly values. He reminds us that early in both the entered apprentice and fellowcraft ceremonies, the candidate passes between the pillars. As we move through the degrees and mature as Masons, we continue to blend various attributes of the two pillars more deeply within ourselves. Brother W. Kirk McNulty points out that moving between and beyond the pillars leads the entered apprentice to Jacob's ladder, and the fellowcraft to the winding staircase. He sees this as a mystical journey in which the candidate is ascending in consciousness from materiality toward divinity. Professor James Curl suggests the pillars can be a reminder of the lost temple which must be rebuilt. Thus, they inspire the candidate to rebuild his character in line with Masonic values. If Fraternal Review were larger, other more esoteric viewpoints might have been included. In the Alchemical Keys to Masonic Ritual, Brother Timothy Hogan compares the Master Mason to the middle pillar in the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which is often depicted as 10 spheres geometrically arranged on 3 pillars. Standing between the 2 outer pillars, the Master Mason has achieved a balance of the various divine attributes represented by the 10 spheres. In the Spirit of Masonry, Brother Foster Bailey presents an astrological perspective. The 2 pillars were chosen by the ancient builders and placed in every temple to remind the brethren of that ancient zodiacal symbol of the sign Gemini in which perhaps the human search for light started. Given such a range of views, it's important to apply some guiding principles to examining the symbolism of Freemasonry. We are speculative Masons, but to be truly Masonic, our speculation must be grounded in the history and traditions of our craft. A good starting point for understanding a symbol is to study what respected scholars have written about it and discuss it with our brothers. Do we know its earliest use and its original meaning? Has the story of the symbol changed over time? Was that story told differently in various cultures? Let's also be aware that there are many methods of interpretation. For example, a symbol could be seen as having a literal, allegorical, and moral meanings. Building Solomon's Temple literally means the construction of a building, but it's also a metaphor for building character. And that temple contains the tablets of sacred law that provide guidelines for proper behavior, the duties we owe to God, our neighbors, and ourselves. We often hear that every Mason must find the meaning of our symbols for himself. That's true, but it's not to say that a symbol has as many meanings as there are Masons. If a symbol can mean anything or everything, it becomes meaningless. Perhaps symbology itself is best seen as having 2 pillars. One is a pillar of speculation and contemplation, the other a pillar of study and dialogue. Combining and recombining them opens the way toward an ever deeper understanding and appreciation of a symbol in both its personal and universal aspects. And that was written by Brother C. Douglas Russell, Editor-in-Chief. And next up we have The Two Pillars or Columns by James Stephen Curl. References to pillars in the biblical accounts may suggest 2 large freestanding columns with some sort of exotic capitals standing in front of and flanking the entrance to the temple. These have their parallels in the twin obelisks that flanked the entrances to ancient Egyptian temples, and, it seems, sundry pagan temples, the remains of which have been found in the Middle East. In the case of the Jerusalem temple, however, interpretations have varied. The Jachin and Boaz pillars, which probably meant columns with some sort of ornate capitals, have been shown as freestanding uprights or as columns in entis, that is, two columns set between flanking walls to form part of a porch. So, in Masonic iconography, we have two columns. The three orders of architecture associated with strength, wisdom, and beauty, and with the three craft degrees, the checkered pavement, sometimes called mosaic, and other elements that are associated with the idea of the lost temple. When we see two columns in entis associated with Masonic buildings, this would seem to be an attempt to suggest Jachin and Boaz as mnemonics of the temple, but they also appear in a subtle way to demonstrate, without shouting about it, a rebuilding of the temple, somewhere in which Masonic work can proceed, with each tool of the architect and stonemason acquiring moral, educational, exemplary, and mnemonic residences. And the next article is The Emergence of the Self Through Masonic Symbols by W. Kirk McNulty. Since the symbolism of the craft comprises a developmental psychology, it envisages that the step to the second degree proceeds naturally as a result of progress in the first. This natural maturation, which relates to the gradual emergence of the self, is indicated in Masonic symbolism by likening the newly made fellowcraft to a ripened ear of corn. The apprentice who is in control of the lower part of his psyche and whose junior warden or self has become active has matured to a state in which he is ready to examine the more interior aspects of his psychological processes. Work at this level occurs in a part of the psyche which the craft refers to as the mental chamber. It is in many ways similar to what Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called the personal unconscious, and to what is traditionally known as the soul. The general approach to the work of the fellowcraft is set out on the second degree tracing board, which is an interior view and gives the impression of entering more deeply into the temple. The second degree board is a detailed drawing of the part of the first, specifically of the point within a circle bounded by two parallel lines and the Jacob's ladder. The two parallel lines are shown in the second degree as the two pillars, here identified as complementary or opposite by association with the pillars of cloud and fire from Exodus and by the terrestrial and celestial spheres surmounting them, while the ladder is replaced on the second degree tracing board by the winding staircase. Like the ladder on the first degree board, the staircase extends in the east-west direction and defines the dimension of consciousness from materiality to divinity. The person who wishes to practice the craft as a mystery is expected to ascend through these various levels of consciousness which the symbol describes. So next up is a section called Travels, and it has a few short articles about different areas. So the first, Syriad, or Ancient Egypt. The Gothic legends were supposedly written by priests and monks as introductory to the ancient charges to give the craft a wondrous and to some extent religious background. The legend of the two pillars is doubtless taken from Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 1, in which the two engraved pillars are credited to the children of Seth and discussed as follows: that their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known, upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire and at another time by the violence of the quantity of water, they made two pillars, the one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, that in case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain and exhibit those discoveries to mankind, and also informed them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Syria to this day. Many years after the flood, these two pillars were found, one by Pythagoras and the other by Hermes, who taught the sciences found thereon. And that article is from Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia. Next up, Sinai Desert. When the Hebrews, led by Moses, were escaping from Egypt and wandering in the wilderness, the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And it came to pass that in the morning watched the Lord looked upon the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and trembled the host of the Egyptians. Something of the same nature recurred long after, when the tabernacle was erected, Exodus chapter 40. Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night, in the sight of all the houses of Israel throughout all their journeys. and that was also from Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia. Next we have modern British Isles. The traditional history, as reflected in the craft ritual, attaches remarkable importance to the pillars, but only in the few lodges still preserving the old style is this importance made evident in the appointments of the lodge. In the early 18th century lodge, the pillars are undoubtedly the first things to strike the eye of a brother on entering, and in the Canongate Kilwinning arrangement, pillars flank the porchway, and a brother can enter the lodge only by passing between them. Is there a survival of those pillars in the present English lodge? We may reasonably conclude that the warden's miniature columns are survivals of pillars, but of which? Some students declare that the association of the warden's columns with the old pillars is absurd, but it is easy to get confused in such a matter. Let us remember that in some of the old lodges there were 2 pillars and 2 only, undoubtedly representing those at the porchway of King Solomon's temple. It does look as though the warden's columns, while far from being exact miniatures of those old lodge pillars, were at one time or another intended to take their places. And that was from Freemason's Guide and Compendium. Then we have Solomon's Temple, Jerusalem. The pillars most remarkable in scripture history were the 2 erected by Solomon at the porch of the temple, and which Josephus thus describes. Moreover, this Hiram made 2 hollow pillars, whose outsides were of brass, and the thickness of the brass was 4 fingers' breadth, and the height of the pillars was 18 cubits or 27 feet, and the circumference 12 cubits or 18 feet. But there was cast with each of their chapiters lily work that stood upon the pillar, and it was elevated 5 cubits, 7.5 feet, round about which there was network interwoven with small palms made of brass and covered the lily work. To this also were hung 200 pomegranates in 2 rows. The one of these pillars he set at the entrance of the porch on the right hand or south and called it Jachin, and the other at the left hand or north and called it Boaz. It has been supposed that Solomon, in erecting these pillars, had reference to the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire which went before the Israelites in the wilderness, and that the right hand or south pillar represented the pillar of cloud, and the left hand or north pillar represented that of fire. Solomon did not simply erect them as ornaments to the temple, but as memorials of God's repeated promises of support to his people of Israel. And thus were the Jews, in passing through the porch to the temple, daily reminded of the abundant promises of God and inspired with confidence in his protection and gratitude for his many acts of kindness to his chosen people. And that is from Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. So the next section of the issue is called Fragments. Pillar, apprentice, or prentices, a noted column in Roslin Chapel, Scotland, of rather unusual ornate design, in that it has spiral garlands entwined around it. Legend says that the master either lost his plans for the column or lacked the skill to execute it, but having gone away for a trip, he returned to find that an apprentice, the son of a widow, had completed the beautiful work, whereon he became so enraged that he smote the apprentice on the head with a setting maul and killed him. It is thought possible that the legend is a forerunner of the legend of Hiram, and that is from Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia. The Masonic symbolism of the 2 pillars may be considered, without going into minute details, as being twofold. First, in reference to the names of the pillars, they are the symbols of the strength and stability of the institution. And then in reference to the ancient pillars of fire and cloud, they are symbolic of our dependence on the superintendent guidance of the great architect of the universe, by which alone that strength and stability are secured. Also from Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Extract from the lecture on the second tracing board. The 2 great pillars, which were placed in the porchway entrance on the south side, were formed hollow, the better to serve as archives to Freemasonry, for therein were deposited the constitutional rolls. These pillars were adorned with 2 chapiters, and with 2 spheres on which were delineated maps of the celestial and terrestrial globes, pointing out Masonry universal. That is from Henry Carr's World of Freemasonry. There is a technical but unessential difference between a pillar and a column. Both are used to support a superimposed mass, as an upper wall, floor, roof, or arch. The term pillar is used as almost exclusively in the Masonic ritual, even in places where column would be preferable. The various pillars and columns referred to in Masonic legends and rituals are 1. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, 2. The two pillars mentioned in the Gothic legends and their symbolic derivatives, sometimes called the Pillars of Enoch. 3. The two porch pillars or columns, Jachin and Boaz, with their pommels. 4. The 5 columns representing the 5 orders of architecture. And 5. The 3 columns, wisdom, strength, and beauty, supporting the lodge. 6. The 2 wardens' columns. And 7. The broken column. And that is from Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia. And then we move on to the Short Talk Bulletin, 2 Pillars, by Carl Claudy. Few references in Freemasonry are less understood than the 2 brazen pillars in the porch of King Solomon's temple. Probably a greater mass of misinformation exists regarding these than any other symbol in the craft. Early ritualists confused the mythical pillars of stone, spoken of in almost all the old charges or manuscript constitutions of the craft, with the brazen pillars of the porch. The result is that modern Freemasons have composite pillars fusing of the ancient and the mythical pillars, on which were supposed to be engraved the arts and sciences of the time before the flood, and those which Hiram Abiff erected, undoubtedly with Egyptian influences and memories of Egyptian temples to guide him, before the great house of the Lord which Solomon built. Modern Masonry has hollow pillars to serve as safe repositories for the archives of Masonry and to preserve them from flood and fire, in spite of the fact that sacred history says nothing of Masonry or the reason for the pillars being hollow. How high were the pillars? A question which has agitated American Freemasonry, largely without reason, for many years. A majority of American rituals state that they were 35 cubits in height, a minority hold to 18, one compromises on 30, a few do not give the height at all. Many rituals set forth the fact that Hiram cast the pillars on the plains of Jordan in the clay ground between Zuccoth and Zarthan, or Zaretha. Both 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles are authority for the statement. But if there ever existed a clay ground in the location specified, it has disappeared and left no trace. Explorations, Lynch in 1847, Ridgway in 1874, not only found no clay ground, but no trace of smelters, furnaces, or other means of melting and casting brass. The globes, celestial and terrestrial, which usually surmount American lodge room pillars, are wholly modern inventions without basis in scriptural fact. Somewhere, at some time, some ritual maker confused the spherical form of the chapiter with an additional sphere. Desiring to account for it, he drew a map of the world on one and a map of the heavens on the other. But in the Kings and Chronicles accounts and in Josephus, there are no mentions of celestial and terrestrial globes. All this is more interesting than important. The symbolical meaning of the pillars is the vital matter to Freemasons. In the eyes of critical scholarship, the ancient meaning was of the might and majesty of deity. From the dawn of religion, the pillar, monolith, or built up has played an important part in the worship of the unseen. From the huge boulders of Stonehenge, among which the Druids are supposed to have performed their rites, through East Indian temples to the religion of ancient Egypt, scholars trace the use of pillars as an essential part of the religious worship. Indeed, in Egypt, the obelisk stood for the very presence of the sun god himself. The ancients believed the earth to be flat, and that it was supported by 2 pillars of God, placed at the western entrance of the world as then known. These are now called Gibraltar on one side of the strait and Ceuta on the other. Some writers have suggested that the pillars represent the masculine and feminine elements in nature, others that they stand for authority of church and state, because on stated occasions the high priest stood before one pillar and the king before the other. Some students think that they allude to the 2 legendary pillars of Enoch, upon which, tradition informs us, all the wisdom of the ancient world was inscribed in order to preserve it from inundations and conflagrations. William Preston supposed that by them Solomon had reference to the pillars of cloud and fire which guarded the children of Israel out of the bondage and into the promised land. One authority says a literal translation of their names, Boaz and Jachin, is "in thee is strength," and "it shall be established," and by a natural transposition may be thus expressed: O Lord, thou art almighty, and thy power is established from everlasting to everlasting. The entered apprentice, in the process of being passed to the degree of fellowcraft, passes between the pillars. No hint is given that he should pass nearer to one than the other. No suggestion is made that either may work a greater influence than the other. He merely passes between. A deep significance is in this very omission. Masons refer to the promise of God unto David. The interested may read in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, and gather that the establishment promised by the Lord was that of a house, a family, a descent of blood from David unto his children and his children's children. The names of the pillars have many translations. Strength and establishment are but two. Power and wisdom or control fit the meaning of the words as well. Used to blast stumps from fields, dynamite is an aid to the farmer. Used in war, it kills and maims. Fire cooks food and makes steam for engines. Fire also burns houses and destroys forests. But it is not the power, but the use of power which is good or bad. The truth applies to any power, spiritual, legal, monarchical, political, or personal. Power is without either virtue or vice. The user may use it well or ill as he pleases. Freemasonry passes the brother in the process of becoming a fellowcraft between the pillar of strength, power, and the pillar of establishment, choice, and control. He is a man now, and no minor or infant. He has grown up Masonically. Before him are spread the two great essentials to all success, all greatness, and all happiness. Like any other power, temporal or physical, religious or spiritual, Freemasonry can be used for well or ill. Here is the lesson set before the fellowcraft. If he, like David, would have his kingdom of Masonic manhood established in strength, he must pass between the pillars with understanding that power without control is useless, and control without power futile. Each is a complement of the other. In the passage between the pillars, the fellowcraft not only has his feet set upon the winding stairs, but is given, so he has eyes to see and ears to hear, secret instructions as to how he shall climb those stairs, that he may, indeed, reach the middle chamber. He is to climb by strength, but directed by wisdom. He is to progress by power, but guided by control. He must rise by the might that is in him, but arrive by the wisdom of his heart. So considered, the inaccuracies and misstatements of ritual regarding the pillars become relatively unimportant. Whether 18 or 35 cubits high, whether cast in one place or another, whether or not surmounted in Solomon's day with globes terrestrial and celestial, matter little. The lesson is there, the meaning of the symbol to be read. The initiate of old saw in the obelisk the very spirit of the god he worshipped. The modern Masonic initiate may see in the two pillars the means by which he may travel a little further, a little higher, towards the secret middle chamber of life, in which dwells the unseen presence. And next up we have Lectures in the Second Degree, Section 3 by William Preston, starting with Clause 3, Capitals of Columns. What adorns those pillars? Each of those columns was adorned with a capital or chapter, but this was not included in the stated height of the column, but was afterwards added, when the columns were fixed in their allotted departments of the temple. What might be the height of these capitals? In height, these capitals are said to extend to 5 cubits. How were the capitals adorned? They are represented to have been adorned with lilywork, network, and pomegranates. What did these emblematically depict? The lilywork was intended to denote peace, the network was considered as the emblem of unity, and the pomegranates of plenty, for during the whole time that this magnificent temple was building, under the protection of heaven and auspices of Solomon, universal peace, combined unity, and abundant plenty shed their influence to surrounding nations. What was the number of pomegranates? 2 rows of pomegranates were placed round each capital, 100 granates being assigned to each row, so that on both capitals in the whole 400 pomegranates were delineated. What moral did this denote? From these emblems we draw this moral, that the blessings of plenty will ever be the happy effects of peace and unity. Hence, this lesson strongly impresses on the minds of craftsmen that honest industry and good intentions will never be overlooked by the ingenious and deserving, but that whoever persevered in exerting his talents for the general good in unison with his fellows will be justly entitled to receive the rewards of his labor in plenty and abundance, thereby enjoying, in the smiles of an almighty providence, the blessings of concord, peace, and tranquility. Thus, from the ornaments of these capitals, we draw the most instructive lesson and exemplify the good effects of industry and social union. Clause 4, Clause of the Coverings. What further adorned those coverings? The capital of each of those columns was further adorned with a round ball or globe. What covered that ball? It was overlaid with network. Why so overlaid? To imply that the whole work had been executed and completely finished in unity and harmony. What is the principal use of these globes? What an august conception does this give of the works of the great Creator! Here we perceive thousands and thousands of suns multiplied without end, all arranged around us at immense distances from each other, attended by 10,000 times 10,000 worlds, all in rapid motion, yet calm, regular, and harmonious, invariably keeping their prescribed paths, and all peopled with myriad of intelligent beings, formed for endless progress in perfection and happiness. The principal use of these globes is to serve as maps to distinguish the outward parts of the earth and the situation of the fixed stars. They enable us to illustrate and explain the phenomena which arise from the annual revolution of the sun and the diurnal revolution of the earth round its own axis. They are considered in our seminaries as the noblest instruments for improving the mind and giving it the most clear and distinct idea of any problem and proposition, as well as enabling it to solve and explain the same. What advantage do we derive from the contemplation of this study? While we are employed in contemplating these globes, we must be inspired with the profoundest reverence for the Deity, and the most exalted admiration of his works. Hence we find that, by the ingenuity of men, the bulk of the earth had been discovered, the situations of countries and kingdoms ascertained, trade and commerce carried on, the produce of nature improved, and all the conveniences of life dispersed among the various inhabitants of the world. By the extension of knowledge, our faculties have been enlarged, our understanding improved, our ideas extended, and our minds elevated, encouraged to promote a friendly intercourse among distant nations. We have entered into all the depths of astronomy, geography, navigation, and all the arts dependent upon them, by which society has been meliorated, civilized, and improved. If these advantages have resulted from the study of those artificial representations of the heavens and of the earth, are we not led from thence to form this pleasing deduction, that the minds which are capable of such deep researches not only derive their origin from that adorable Being who formed the universe, but that they are incited to aspire after more perfect knowledge of his nature, and stricter conformity to his will? For if so much power, wisdom, goodness, and magnificence be displayed in the material creation, which is the least considerable part of the universe, how great, how wise, how good must he be who forms, preserves, and governs the whole. Thus, from the rude covering of the two round balls, intended to grace the capitals of two rude columns, which Solomon reared and consecrated, have been traced the origin of many important discoveries, which the study of the globes have produced, and the improvements of civilized society have enlarged and extended for the benefit of mankind. And now we will finish up with the final word. The mountains on either side of what are now known as the Straits of Gibraltar were called by the ancients the Pillars of Hercules and were regarded as marking the end of the world, bearing the appropriate inscription non plus ultra, meaning there is no more beyond this. Charles V, King of Spain, 1519 to 1566, adopted the two pillars as his device or symbol with the motto plus ultra, there is more beyond. Though the search of the distant past for lost knowledge would long continue, the Pillars of Hercules, with their new motto reversing the ancient message, proclaimed that men were outstripping the achievements of the ancients. The new symbolism of the Pillars of Hercules was so popular it could hardly fail to attract the attention of the Mason craft, and it may have merged with the other pillars to make Masonic pillar symbolism an amalgam of not two but three pairs of pillars. Assuming the pillars were, as in later Masonic practice, regarded as flanking the entrance to the lodge, then the Mason could be seen when he passed between them as simultaneously entering a holy place, the temple, acquiring lost knowledge or secrets, as they were also the pillars of knowledge, and venturing from the known to the unknown in search of new knowledge, as they were also the Pillars of Hercules. Threefold interrelated symbolism may seem confusing, but it would have been immensely satisfying in an age that believed that more complex a symbol was, the more powerful and valuable it became. So that is excerpted and paraphrased from David Stevenson's The Origins of Freemasonry. And with that, thank you for listening. That ends up our October 2016 Fraternal Review from the Southern California Research Lodge.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a comment. We enjoy hearing from our listeners. If you really like what you heard, share this podcast with your friends and lodge members. Visit us online at solomonstaircase.org.